everybody, I'm Emmeline Dewhurst here for the 007GB British Fan Club, and with me we have, well, no introduction needed, really, Mr. John Glen. How are you today?
I'm fine, thanks.
Thank you
Emily.
ever so much for having us in your home, your beautiful home. Thank you. And Janine, you makes a fantastic cup of tea. So I have some questions here, and I'm going to read them if you don't mind.
Okay.
And I'm going to start at the beginning. So I read that you had your start in the filmmaking industry as a messenger boy.
That's right.
In 1945.
That's right. Immediately after the Second World War, and I'd spent. I lived in Sunbury-on-Thames, which is in the outskirts of London, and I have great memories of dodging doodlebugs and collecting shrapnel instead of toys in the street in the morning. You go down and pick up all the shrapnel. It came down from anti-aircraft shells that were sent up, and we used to swap those. And there was also a prisoner of war camp at Campden Park Racecourse, and the very brave kids I knew used to break into the prisoner of war camp and steal stuff that was being burnt on the rubbish dump, like German jackboots and water flasks and belts. The SS belt was a very prized possession, and they would be swapped around at the school. So as far as us kids were concerned, the war was a very exciting time.
Yes. Wow. Did you always want to go into the film industry, or was it just by happen chance?
It was purely by chance. I had a friend. I was in the Sea Cadets, and I had a friend. He had managed to get a job as a messenger boy at Nettlefold Film Studios at Warton-on-Thames, which is quite close by. And he got promoted into the camera department, and there was a vacancy. So I got on my bike and I went over to Warton-on-Thames, saw the commissioner and said, I understand there's a vacancy, would you consider me for the job as messenger? And he took one look at me and he said, Sonny, he said, you're too big for the uniform, I'm sorry. He said, but I've got a friend, he said, Shepperton Studios is nearby, and it's a much bigger studio, and they have more than one messenger boy. So I'll give them a call and get you an interview, which he did. So I cycled over to Shepperton Studios and I put my name down. And 2 or 3 weeks later, I got a letter saying report for duty, which I did, and that was the start of my career.
Wow.
I don't think it could happen today, quite honestly. A 14-year-old boy.
No.
The world has changed.
Yeah.
I think probably kids, from what I can make out with my nephews and grandchildren, what have you, is that they stay at university too long now. They're sort of men. They're 26 years of age before they really get started.
Yeah.
And I always think your creative side of you is very vibrant when you're 15, 16, 17, more so you should be out there creating.
Yeah. Well, you moved up the ranks, and then you kind of served as a film editor and second unit director. Can you tell me more about those kind of career moments and how that came about?
Well, I mean, progress was very, very slow. And of course, when you're young, time seems to go on forever and ever. And my stint as a messenger boy and an office boy, and then I got a job in the master carpenter's office as an office boy, which was a promotion. And that's where I got my love of woodwork. I used to go out and play around. The carpenters would allow me to use their tools and their workbench, and I'd make all kinds of things with wood for 6 or 7 months. And then I got an opportunity to go into the editing rooms. And what attracted me to the editing rooms initially was the smell of the film cement. It smelled like pear drops, and I found it very attractive. It was amyl acetate, which we used to, in those days, used to join film together, to splice film. Of course, all that's gone out the window now. It's all on electronic, so it wouldn't apply today. But that was what attracted me to the editing rooms. And
Yeah.
then I had a very long career, gradually climbing up the ladder as an assistant editor, and then I became a sound editor for quite a while, and then I became an editor eventually. It took me a long time. So, you know, and then I started working on television. Television started really at that time. They started making TV series like Danger Man and all those films. And I managed to get a job as editor on those. And then there was always an opportunity to do a bit of second unit directing. You know,
Right.
certain shots which didn't involve the main artists needed doing, particularly on things like Danger Man's. You know, you needed a close shot of a Philly razor or something, and a close shot of it, and I would be sent on the floor to, you know, to work with the camera crews and doing all these little funny little shots and people knocking on doors and things. And I made a career out of it. Then I progressed to doing car chases and so forth.
Yeah.
And eventually I got the opportunity to do several major films as second unit director and editor. I used to do both jobs. And that really was my grounding to become a director.
Wow. Well, one of my all-time favourite films is Wild Geese.
Oh, yes.
Can you tell me what the experience was working on that film?
Well, Wild Geese was produced by Ewan Lloyd, who had a background actually in Bond films. He was a publicist, and he was a very sharp. He had an awful job raising the money to make the Wild Geese, but somehow he managed to raise the money to employ Richard Burton, Richard Harris, and Roger Moore, of course, and a very fine German actor as well who was in it. I'm trying to remember his name. But at any rate, you know, I got the shot that I remember most was Ewan Lloyd said to me, he said, I want you to do this shot of the parachutists leaping out of this huge aircraft. And he said, I can only afford one go at it. So he said, you've got one chance. So anyway, I went up to the airfield and I noticed the cameraman was in shorts and shirt sleeves. So I said to him, I think you really ought to put some warm clothes on because we're going to be shooting at 7,000 or 8,000 feet. And it's warm down here in Africa, but you get up 8,000 feet, it gets a bit chilly.
Yeah.
Particularly when the door is off the aircraft for us to put the camera. So he said, no, I'll be fine. So I didn't press it. So we get up and we're in a low-winged aircraft. And we lined up with this big transport aircraft. We had all the parachutists in it. And I'd always, at that time, radio telephony was in its infancy in a sense. And I didn't really trust it. I'd had a few experiences where the radios didn't work for one reason or another. So I said, I tell you what, I said, I'm going to give you a copy of the Times newspaper, which was a broadsheet in those days. And I said, no matter what you do, before you say to all your parachutists to leap out the aircraft, throw this Times newspaper out the back of the airplane. And I shall see it and I'll start turning over in case the radio doesn't work. Sure enough, the radio didn't work. And I thought, was that the Times coming out the back of the airplane or not? You know, we were about half a mile away from it. It was very difficult to see. So I said to the cameraman, turn over, and said to the pilot, turn right slightly to get the wing out of shot. And as the wing went out of shot, these chaps came tumbling out of the airplane, and it was the most memorable shot.
Wow.
You'll see it in the Wild Geese.
Yeah.
And it was. I shot it at 3 times normal speed. It's 72 frames a second, and it was very poetic. And it was. I think it was Ewan Lloyd, the producer. I think it was his favourite shot in the film. And Andy McLaglen was the main unit director. He was a big American guy who worked with John Wayne and worked on very important films in America. And he didn't really trust me because I'd rather been thrust on him by Ewan Lloyd.
Right.
But I think I won him over with that shot.
Yeah, it's a great shot.
I think he realised that he needed me on the movie.
Yeah. Well, you worked with Sir Roger Moore 11 times on films.
Yeah.
What was he to you?
Well, Roger has always been, up until the point I first worked for him, he was working on The Saint, a TV series at Elstree. At the same time, I was working with Patrick McGowan on Danger Man at Shepperton. So we were kind of rivals in a way.
Yeah.
We were both working for Lou Grade, ATV, making the films, or ITV as it was then. And so we kind of had a sort of a rivalry going on between the two, the two outfits. And so I hadn't really ever thought that I'd work with Roger. And then suddenly Michael Klinger was a producer, and he managed to organize some finance from South Africa. Now, our union, the ACT, had forbidden us to work in Africa, in South Africa in particular, because of the apartheid that was prevalent there. So the union said, you mustn't do this film, and we decided to ignore the union, and we went and did the film because we were all desperate for the work. It was important to keep working. So we went out to Africa and we shot the Wild Geese, and first of all, Gold. It was the first time I think I'd worked with Roger on Gold, which is a story about the mining, and it was very successful. It was a very good film. Susanna York and Roger, sort of romantic film with a drama of the mine being flooded and what have you. And we shot most of it there, and then we came back to Pinewood and we did the mine scenes. It was impossible to do them in the actual mine.
Yeah.
I did a lot of filming in the mine, but second unit filming, but the actual flooding of the mine we had to do in this controlled in the tank at Pinewood. And it was very successful, made a lot of money, and then we went on to do Shelter the Devil there, followed that, so that was good.
Yeah, I can imagine it's not difficult getting on with somebody like Roger.
Oh, Roger, he was a joy to work with. He was very professional, very considerate to other members of the crew, always concerned for their welfare. But most of all, he had this wonderful sense of humour, and he was always cracking jokes all day long. And in fact, sometimes as a director with Roger, you think yourself have to allow half an hour shooting time every day for Roger's jokes. It just takes time, but it's worth it.
Yes.
Keep morale up.
Yeah. Well, you contributed to 3 James Bond films on Her Majesty's Secret Service, The Spy Who Loved Me, and Moonraker. And then following the release of Moonraker, as a highly skilled and in-demand editor, you were promoted to the rank of the official director of the series, and you went on to direct all 5 Bond films of the 1980s. Did your approach differ from the first 3 that you were involved in to the others?
Well, I was working in Paris with Lewis Gilbert on a film that was shot in Japan, and it was while we were finishing that film. It's quite an interesting story how I got that film, actually, because years before I'd been working on a TV series as a sound editor at Walton-on-Thames Studios for Hannah Weinstein, who was producing For Just Men, a story with 4 big stars. And while I was there, we did just I don't know, 13, I think 13 episodes of this film, of the series. And as we got towards the end of the series, they started laying staff off, as you close the thing down. And Thelma Connell, who was the supervising editor and producer, she called me into her office and she said, "John," she said, "I know that when this series ends, you'll get another job straight away. But dear Freddie, who was my co-sound editor, he's going to struggle. So would you mind leaving first?" And I thought to myself, well, this is a great reward for, for doing your job properly.
Yeah.
You were asked to leave earlier, but that was the way they were. And so I said, "Not at all, Thelma, it's a pleasure." And she repaid me years later because she was working for Lewis Gilbert editing this film, and she got ill. And she, in fact, died on the film. And apparently her last words to Lewis was, "Get John Glen."
Wow.
And so I suddenly got this phone call, and I found myself working in Paris with Lewis. And it was while we were doing that film that Cubby Broccoli came over. He'd taken over from Harry Saltzman as the sole producer of the Bond series, and he asked Lewis to direct Spy Who Loved Me. And Lewis said to me, he said, "Cubby said he wants you to do the second unit action stuff." He said, "because you did such a good job on Her Majesty's Secret Service."
Yeah.
So it took a long time to come round, but eventually it did. It was a bit of a fairy tale, really, how it all came about. But it just shows you you got to think of the long version, really. How long things take sometimes to come to fruition. But there's continuity in life generally. You find it does pay off in the end if you do a good job.
What was your experience like working with Christopher Reeve and Richard Donner?
Well, I didn't actually, Christopher Reeve, the only time I came in touch with Christopher was when we were on the Bond films. He always used to come onto our set to look at the pretty girls.
Did he?
He was a great friend of Roger's, and they used to come on. He used to come on in costume sometimes, and people would say, "I think you're on the wrong set." But no, he was a very nice man, and I knew him quite well. But I didn't actually direct him personally. But I did some second unit work in Canada on the film. Dick Donner was a lovely, lovely man. He was so offhand, and he was so laid back. I remember I came back from filming. I think it was in South America. I just got off the plane. I got home, put my bag down in the hallway. The phone was ringing. I picked it up, and it was Dick Donner saying, "Get your ass over to Pinewood and come and I want to talk about a project." And he wanted me to come on the film and do some second unit in Canada because he couldn't. He was going out there and directing his section of the film that took place in Canada, and then he had to come back to shoot some urgent stuff at Pinewood, and he wanted someone to take over for him to do the last couple of 2 or 3 weeks. So I found myself out in Canada, a place called Drumella, which was a big depression in the prairie, and I enjoyed it very much working out there. It was very nice. And Dick Donner, he had one of those luxury caravans that he used to have on the set, or by the side of the set, for him to use as an office or what have you. And he said, I'm going to leave you my Winnebago." He said, "You can use that." And so I found myself every day sleeping. It was a 2-hour journey to the location. So I used to get in the bed in the caravan and sleep for a further 2 hours on my way to the location.
Fantastic.
And I used to entertain people in there. We used to have our lunch in the Winnebago. It was really nice. It was nice of Dick to leave it to me,
Yeah, absolutely. What's your favourite film? Non-Bond.
Non-Bond. Well, my early recollections of the films that really impressed me was Treasure of Sierra Madre, which was directed by John Huston. who was one of my favourite directors. He was another great character. I mean, these famous directors, you know, they're not. Some are intense, but the ones I like are always very laid back, and they joke around, and they keep everyone in a relaxed state on the film. I suppose they crack the whip when they have to, but John Huston was a very good example to me of how a director should act, and nothing would faze him. You know, if a thing didn't work, or I mean, things go wrong all the time when you're making a film, and the clever directors just embrace it. Whatever happens, you find another way to get around the problem. And I suppose that applies to all kinds of businesses, really. You have to adapt very quickly when you're making a film. There's always another plan. There's always a plan B or a plan C sometimes. So, you know, it's great training. I think my early training working on TV series stood me in good stead, because if you went over schedule, you got the sack. You know, that was as simple as that. You know, you had to keep the schedule. And that's great discipline. And Roger was good that way. All those years he had working on the Saint instilled a kind of a discipline in him. And I can never remember him ever forgetting a line. Or he was absolutely word perfect every time. I don't know. I did ask him how he said, "Oh, it's a technique you develop as an actor." I could never become an actor. I could never remember the lines.
No. Well, from the outside looking in, it looked like you had a fabulous career. Did you enjoy it?
Oh, I loved every minute of it. Yeah, on the Bonds in particular, and you know, those big films I did with you and Lloyd. I just loved it. You know, I was lucky, I suppose, that I worked with very creative people and great actors, and you know, you can work on rubbish films as well, you know, and it's not such a pleasant experience. But when you're working with true professional people who know what they're doing, great actors, they always surprise you with what they do with you look at a line of dialogue on a page and it doesn't mean too much, and you get a great actor takes those lines and produces something fantastic. So I mean, I always loved working with actors. Although I was an editor and you know, spent a lot of time in a room with a darkened room editing film, I really enjoyed working with actors. I just felt I was in my element with them. Yeah. And I used to give them full rein, you know, and I was always surprised with how creative they are. Yeah. It's good.
Well, you obviously highly regarded by the Bond fans, and especially with the 007GB British Fan Club, you're being awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award.
Oh, I'm very appreciative of that.
Yeah. I was going to say, how does that feel?
You don't get many, as a James Bond director, you don't get many awards. They seem to be bypassed. I think they're taken for granted so much by the critics and people who present these awards. But there's only been a couple of Oscars, I think, awarded to Bond films. And when you think of what they've achieved, it's strange, really. They've not been fully recognised, I don't think.
No.
But fortunately, they're recognised at the box office. The public love them.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for taking the time today and talking to me. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure everybody who watches this and just on behalf of the British Fan Club and everybody else and the members and anybody who's just simply a fan, thank you ever so much.
It's been a pleasure, Emmeline. Thank you. Nice interview.
Good. Good.